Treasurer Jim Chalmers about to give the final budget update.
Okay, everyone good? Well, the budget's less than 4 weeks away now. It'll be a pretty solid budget focused on cost of living relief with an economic dividend, investing in people, their skills, their energy and their future, and starting to deal with this legacy of waste and rorts, which has been a hallmark of budgets for too long now. Less than 4 weeks away now, we will hand down a budget which is all about delivering the investments that we promised at the election, dealing meaningfully with cost of living relief without making the job of the Reserve Bank even harder, and beginning to trim some of the spending from wasteful areas so that we can redirect it to more productive areas. Today we've got a range of tasks. First of all, to provide the final budget outcome that we spoke to you about last week, and Katie will do the bulk of that. Then I want to talk about the petrol excise relief, which comes off tonight. Then I wanted to update you on some of the work that we've been doing in our portfolio as it relates to the Optus data breach as well, and obviously happy to take your questions. When it comes to the final budget outcome, this is about last year, and we told you most of it last week, but today we formally released the full final budget outcome in the usual way. I think it speaks volumes about the budget that we inherited, that even with an improvement of this magnitude, we still have $30 billion of deficit, we still have around $1 trillion of debt, and the pressures on the budget are intensifying rather than easing. And so I think it's important that we have that perspective as we go through the documents for the final budget outcome today. There is a combination of improvements to the tax take for a range of reasons, but a big part of what we're presenting today is also the fact that a number of the programs were underspent in the last year, and some of those pressures now cascade into subsequent years, and for much of those pressures we need to find room for that. But Katie will talk us through the final budget outcome in a bit more detail, and then I'll do fuel and then Optus.
Okay, thanks very much, Jim. So Jim's given you the headline figures, and you can see, and we did cover some of that yesterday, but shows looking backwards, obviously the deficit has improved. I thought I might be most useful if I concentrate some of my remarks on the lower payments side, and particularly the underspends and some of the other issues we're identifying with expiring measures as we're going through the budget process, because that's a looking forward problem. But certainly we've seen billions of dollars in underspends in terms of money that was promised for last financial year that didn't get out the door by our predecessors. We've seen that in the COVID-related program, so $2.8 billion from delays in contracting vaccines and PPE, delays in road and rail projects and associated payments of $3.5 billion, partly from disruptions to supply chains, skill shortages and capacity constraints, lower demand for health, NDIS and aged care services, which also combined to around $4.6 billion. We do expect that many of the underspend and payment delays which are reflected in this document, will flow over into next year, or this year and future years. So some of those include the infrastructure programs, some of the payments to flood-affected communities. There's $2 billion there. Some of those payments around purchases of PPE, rapid antigen tests for aged care facilities, $800 million there. Some of the delays in those modern manufacturing grants that were committed to but not paid under the former government. And some of the support for businesses impacted by lockdowns and funding, which will be available in future years. So we are still working through all of the details in the budget around this, but these types of delays, we expect to see about $10 billion of those underspends, the budget, flow into the coming year. Obviously, there's still those long-term structural pressures that are on the budget. So one of those, obviously, is a higher cost of servicing government debt. We're seeing that have a significant impact on the forward estimates. So managing that is going to be a challenge. We've got the higher indexation flowing through because of the inflation figures, and also those key programs, NDIS, health, aged care and defence. presenting challenges going forward. I think you'll see in the budget some of the work that we're also trying to address around these expiring measures, which are a real problem. Many of the programs we're finding that are ongoing, and there is no doubt they are ongoing, but weren't funded to dress up essentially the out years of the previous government's forward estimates, which we're going to have to address because they simply aren't expiring programs.
Yep. Thanks very much, Katie. On petrol, as you know, overnight the petrol excise relief will come off on the timetable legislated by our predecessors. We are under no illusions about the impact that this will have on family budgets. We don't pretend that this won't make things more difficult for a lot of Australian motorists. Our responsibility to the Australian people is to manage the budget responsibly and to be upfront about what we can and can't afford to do. And the reason that this petrol excise relief is expiring tonight on the former government's timetable is because it would be too expensive to extend it indefinitely. Even to extend it for 6 months would cost the budget about $3 billion. There are substantial pressures already on the budget. We've still got around $1 trillion in gross debt in the budget, and so we can't fund everything that Australians would like us to fund. And so all along, before the election, during the election and after the election, we've said to the Australian people in an upfront and honest way, we can't afford to extend this petrol excise relief. We are aware of the pressures and we understand the pressures that Australians are under all around Australia. We will provide responsible cost of living relief in areas like childcare and medicines and TAFE fees, and we will get wages moving again. But we can't afford to fund every bit of cost of living relief indefinitely that people would like us to. That's just the reality of the situation. I spoke this morning at 7 a.m. With Gina Cass-Gottlieb, the chair of the ACCC. I have asked the chair of the ACCC to maximise their role in the petrol market, the fuel market, to make sure that servos and suppliers aren't treating Australians as mugs as this petrol excise relief comes off. We want to make sure that servos and suppliers are doing the right thing. The ACCC is on the case. They will take action if people are behaving in the wrong fashion as this petrol excise relief comes off. As I've pointed out before, and as the various associations have pointed out over the course of the last week or two, there are hundreds of millions of litres of petrol in tanks underground, paid for under the existing excise regime. And so the ACCC will be particularly attentive to the fact that a lot of that fuel was bought at the cheaper price rather than the more expensive price. And so there should not be an automatic 23 cents a litre increase overnight. It depends on how much fuel service stations have under the ground in these tanks bought at the cheaper price. Now, to the ACCC, I say thanks for the work that they've been doing. I know that Australians are experiencing pretty volatile petrol prices at the moment. Even in the last few days, we've seen a number of the big capital cities come up near the peak of the petrol price cycle, the normal cycle, but the ACCC will be very attentive to all that as well. Finally, and thank you for the opportunity to run through a bit of this in some detail, I wanted to thank and acknowledge and commend Minister O'Neill and Minister Rowland and the Attorney-General for the work that they've been leading in our government when it comes to this very concerning Optus data breach. Myself, Stephen Jones, Bill Shorten, Mark Butler now with the disclosure about the Medicare issues. The whole government, but particularly a handful of ministers, have been working almost around the clock for some days now to make sure that we're doing what we responsibly can to make sure that we're protecting these Optus consumers who are the unwilling victims of this data breach that we've seen. And I wanted to tell you in the Treasury portfolio the actions that we've been taking and the consultation that we have been engaged in. Now, first of all, we do expect Optus to do whatever they can to protect their customers and to provide the necessary support. I think we've made that clear in recent days. Since Saturday, when I spoke to the Governor of the Reserve Bank, the Chair of APRA, and the CEO of one of the big four banks, We've made sure that we've been working closely with the financial system and with the regulators to ensure that any steps that could be appropriately taken by the government or by the regulators in the financial system are being taken. What we want to do here is to make sure that if there's more that can be done by financial institutions to monitor risks and protect consumers, then that should be done. And we don't currently see this as an issue of financial stability, but obviously it's an issue about public confidence, and that matters greatly to us as well. At my instigation, early on Monday morning, the Governor of the Reserve Bank convened the Council of Financial Regulators, which is obviously the Reserve Bank, APRA, ASIC, ACCC were there, the ATO, the Treasury, to make sure that we were combining and that we were working together, cooperating, to make sure that we can deal with all of the issues that have been thrown up by this data breach for Optus customers. Again, at my instigation on Monday, the Treasury convened a meeting of several of the banks, as well as the Australian Banking Association, the Customer-Owned Banking Association, APRA, ACCC, and the Australian Financial Crimes Exchange to better understand any options and considerations that we needed to be working through as well. Now, one of the big focuses of these discussions and the discussions that are ongoing, including, again, between myself and the ACCC chair this morning, is the safe and secure sharing of data between Optus and regulated financial institutions with the appropriate safeguards to allow those institutions to undertake enhanced monitoring for the purposes of best protecting their consumers from any bad behaviour following this data breach. And obviously financial institutions can play a really important role here, using that data, if we can work out the best way to get it to them, to protect their customers who are at greatest risk of what's gone on here. Now, the reason that we are in these conversations in an ongoing way is because there are a number of considerations to work through. Privacy is obviously an important consideration, working with the Attorney-General. Which institutions can receive this data and under what terms and with what assurances, and the legal mechanisms required to facilitate this transfer, working closely with the Minister for Communications. So these discussions have had input from all of those regulators, the Treasury as well, and other institutions. Those conversations are ongoing. They've been happening since Saturday. We'll do our best to resolve these issues as soon as we can as part of a suite of broader efforts that the government is undertaking to respond adequately to what's happened here with this Optus data breach.